The high-level donors conference leaves vulnerable Yemenis behind and fails to increase fund for humanitarian response plan. The United Nations Special Envoy Hans Grunberg discusses with Yemeni experts priorities of the security track in the country. Torrential rains hit different parts in Hodeidah and caused severe damage to displaced people's camps in the city. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rana Swaylam. The Gulf Cooperation Council calls on the Yemeni parties to hold consultations to end the war. The Secretary General said that the goal of the consultations is to reach a ceasefire under the auspices of the United Nations and Gulf support. He added that the Yemeni consultations will establish mechanisms for humanitarian action and sustain consultation between the concerned parties. The United Nations, Sweden and Switzerland took the initiative to organize Yemen's donors conference yesterday. Yet, the amount of money that was offered by donors was less than expected, as if the entire world has left vulnerable Yemenis behind. The following report has more details.
Following today's high-level Yemen pledging conference in Geneva, INGOs operating in Yemen are gravely worried that, despite the severe deterioration of an already dire humanitarian catastrophe, international leaders offered less than $1.3 billion. This cut in financing will have a significant impact on the lives of Yemenis. While all donors at the meeting emphasized the gravity of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, the offered $1.3 billion falls short of the requirements stated by the humanitarian community in Yemen by around $2.9 billion. The budget shortage coincides with an increase in the number of people in need in Yemen. The UN was hoping to generate $4.27 billion to support 17.3 million people, but only raised $1.3 billion, with heavy contributors going missing, which prompted organizers to consider holding a second conference later this year. The UN considers war-torn Yemen as the world's worst humanitarian crisis, and the UN Secretary General voiced his disappointment over the funding shortage.
Excellencies, the scope of our response must match the scale of the challenge. We must address the underlying drivers of humanitarian need, break the cycle of violence, and change Yemen's trajectory. And this means stabilizing the economy and restoring basic services. It means supporting the efforts of my special envoy to help the parties find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. And it means an immediate end to hostilities. There is no military solution, and yet we see a multiplication of front lines, increasing numbers of civilian casualties, and instability radiating across the entire region. Allowing the war to continue is a choice, but ending it is also a choice. And I appeal to the parties to choose peace.
As funding for the humanitarian response in Yemen continues to decline yearly, relief organizations have already been compelled to restrict life-saving support. The present financing deficit will have an immediate and serious impact on the lives of millions of Yemeni citizens. We urge the international community to continue its support for the people of Yemen. We must not lose sight of them.
The UN Special Envoy continued second week of consultations with Yemeni delegates on his proposed framework. During 3 days of discussions, Yemeni security experts and civil society leaders explored priorities to inform the security track, improving security governance, and civilian protection in Yemen. United Nations announced that it had obtained only $1.3 billion for Yemen, which have been collected from the Donor Countries Conference for Yemen. The High Commissioner for Refugees announced that 20 million Yemenis are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. The organization added they need their support now more than ever, but most of all, they need a peaceful solution to the conflict. Heavy torrential rains have hit most parts of the country yesterday. Al Khoukha district within Hodeidah was affected hugely by the rains, especially displaced people's camps. More details on this story are within this report.
The IDP camps were flooded in Al Khoukha as a result of the heavy rain in the district, amid the absence of the role of humanitarian organizations and aid agencies. The rains that fell early this morning on Al Khoukha district caused the camps of the displaced to flood and caused damage to the properties of the displaced, including furniture and food.
Look at our dire situation. Is it fair? Aid agencies did not help. Today, because of this rain, I could not go to work. Now, who will provide me and my family with food? We don't have food supplies or anything to eat. I can't feed my children.
Where are the aid workers to help? The rain poured heavily on us and our tents. Aid agencies have provided us with nothing. No food, no shelter, nothing.
I've moved from Adala Governorate. They gave us tents and since then nobody has come to check on us. My wife suffers from a kidney failure and our situation is really terrible. You can ask all those people around about the ineffective role of aid agencies. Yesterday, they started giving people cashes but did not give me anything. They keep telling us your names are not included in the list.
Thousands of displaced people by the Houthi militia live in camps in Al Khoukha district, which lack the minimum requirements for shelter amid difficult living conditions. Camps are not the only thing that got affected by the rain, but the whole district, including streets and markets.
المطر هو نعمة من نعم الله، لكن عندنا في الخوخة.
Rain is a blessing from God, but for us in Al Khoukha, rain turns into a curse. In Al Khoukha and the old market, there is no water drainage project, which makes it really hard for citizens to go out of their homes, as rain damages and ruins everything in the district. We call on the local authority and anyone who can help to provide a water drainage service to this district to ease the suffering of people and prevent the damage caused by the rain, especially with the spread of displaced camps.
The rain hindered the movement of citizens due to the accumulation of flakes in the streets, lanes, and markets, making it hard for citizens to leave their homes or to live a proper, decent life.
The international humanitarian organization Oxfam said that the rise in food prices pushed more Yemenis to beg. The organization added that those who were previously safe and able to support themselves and their families can no longer do so amid the fuel crisis, currency devaluation, and health crisis. The Houthi militia prevents crossing of trucks loaded with oil derivatives in Al Jawf Governorate. Local sources said that the militia passes black market trucks and prevent public services trucks from crossing. They are holding hundreds of trucks transporting oil derivatives at the entrances of Al Hazm city. One child was killed and another one was injured in a Houthi landmine explosion at Zahir area in Al Bayda Governorate. A medical source said that the injured child is in critical condition after the mine amputated one of his feet and inflicted him with various injuries. 6 civilians of one family were killed in a Houthi landmine explosion in Hudaydah city. Local sources said that an anti-vehicle landmine planted by the Houthi militia exploded the moment a civilian vehicle passed and killed 6 civilians from one family and damaged a number of trucks near the site of the explosion. The 8-year war has caused severe damage to civilian infrastructure within major cities. Aden, the interim capital, is one among many other governorates which has worn the scars of this grinding conflict. The following report has more details.
Bullet-riddled homes and buildings turned to rubble and countless pictures of martyrs. 7 years into Yemen's civil war, the interim capital Aden bears the scars of a conflict that shows no signs of dwindling. While Aden is now relatively stable economically, the ancient port city has been left on its knees. Water and electricity are intermittent, serving a population that officials say has tripled to more than 3 million, as people seek safety from fighting raging elsewhere. Aden Governor Ahmed Lemles said the outbreak of war in 2015 was a disaster, leaving the city's infrastructure in ruins. Lemles stated, "We are still suffering from the impacts of war," as he has narrowly escaped a deadly car bomb attack in October. As if civil war and the struggle for the city were not enough, Aden has also been targeted by a number of bombings claimed by the Iranian-backed Houthi militia. Across Yemen, hundreds of thousands have been killed directly or indirectly, and millions displaced by the war, which has left 80% of people on food aid. Yesterday, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned that Yemen risked catastrophe speaking at a donor conference that raised less than a third of the money needed. The number of people starving in famine conditions is projected to increase fivefold this year to 261,000. Lamles said the pressure was exacting a toll on Aden's citizens. Living conditions have affected the people psychologically. He also insisted that Aden remains steadfast and will return to life. Aden's residents are struggling to afford basic goods amid soaring inflation. The salaries are low, the situation is difficult, and people are fighting to lead a dignified life. There is no internet, no phone network, there is nothing. Citizens are looking for water, gas, and petrol. Many in Aden blame the government for the city's deterioration, and some of them make no secret of their desire to become an independent southern state.
Coming next. Due to the 8-year war, nature reserves in Aden have turned into waste dumps.
راتب الواحد 120 ألف، والكيس الدقيق ب18,000، والكيس السكر اليوم ب20,000. كم يعني بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل بكيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالتي الحين حالة لما خرج المندوب احنا شلقينا ما نقدرش ناكل الأكل الداخل، ما احنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. Energy companies in Aden threatened to cut generating stations starting next week. It urged the government to pay 50% of the remaining financial dues to the companies during the period from April to September 2020. It called on the governor to coordinate with the Ministry of Finance to hold a meeting with them to find radical solutions. Al-Hiswa Nature Reserve in Aden has been considered one of the most famous sites by the United Nations. Yet, due to the ongoing war, it has turned into rubbish-strewn wasteland. The following report has more details.
What was long a haven for flamingos and other migratory birds is now swarmed by crows. Al-Hiswa Nature Reserve was once hailed as a beacon of conservation efforts by the United Nations, but civil war has turned it into a rubbish-strewn wasteland, reeking of sewage. The ticket office has been abandoned at the entrance to the 19-hectare site in Yemen's southern city of Aden, where trees have been cut down and construction waste dumped. Aden residents stated, Al-Hiswa used to be a recreational outlet for residents and tourists. However, it has now become a rubbish dump, full of insects and sewage. Declared a nature reserve in 2006, Al-Hiswa was one of 35 initiatives awarded by the UN's Equator Prize in 2014 for meeting climate and development challenges through sustainable use of nature. The initiative was one of its kind in Yemen, improving livelihoods, creating jobs, and generating about $96,000 as revenues in 2012. But since 2014, Yemen has been embroiled in the conflict erupted by the Houthi militia. Since then, the reserve has been left in ruins by the fighting. The director of Yemen's Department of Nature Reserves said that the wastewater treatment tanks had not been serviced since 2015, and some nearby residents have seized parts for their personal use. While visitors have mostly stayed away, some parts of the reserve have been used as an informal waste dump, according to the UK-based Conflict and Environment Observatory. Insecurity from violence, war, and conflict poses the most significant threat to the long-term sustainability of the reserve, as the United Nations Development Programme said.
Since the war began in 2014, Yemenis have been suffering to move freely inside and outside the country. What adds to their troubles is the fact that Yemen Air Flight Company has risen the tickets fare to incredible level. People, especially those who seek medication outside Yemen, find it really hard to buy such expensive tickets. The following report looks at the suffering of people because of Yemen Airways' approach.
The Yemeni airline profits off of travelers by imposing fines on their postponed flights. The unjust procedures have exploited Yemeni's tragedies without religious or moral qualms, by imposing exorbitant financial fees for those wishing to postpone or advance their flights, or add new travelers to the trips.
Yemeni's tickets are the most expensive in the world, and there is nothing to do to stop the spread of corruption in Yemen. Airline services are excruciatingly bad. We were like animals in the wild, the bigger animals preying on the smaller ones.
Travelers coming to Aden pay the cost of trips between governorates to reach Aden and travel abroad, but they were surprised by the delay of trips without prior notice. Furthermore, the airline offered no remorse or compensation for the losses passengers incurred while staying in Aden.
Yemenia, the only airline in the country, is home to only 2 functional airplanes, both of which are ill-equipped to fly internationally. Yemenia's flights are often irregular. I've traveled to and from Cairo about 3 times in the past couple of years, and ticket prices have gone from $270 to $650.
Worst of all is the absurd ticket price, which can reach up to $800 and is nowhere near affordable for sick patients who can barely buy their medication.
Some are sick with cancer and need traveling companions, but they cannot afford the price of an additional ticket. These patients can barely cover the cost of treatment abroad.
Citizens demand the Yemeni airline company to take into account the circumstances of the passengers, who suffer through the difficulties of transit and incur additional expenses. They also implore the rise of competing airline companies with better offers so as to lower the prices of flights.
We should have more airlines in the country. The more competition, the lower the cost of flights. In Yemenia, they charge us in US dollar, completely heedless of our inability to pay in such a currency.
These inequitable practices have profited from Yemeni's misfortunes without regard for religious or moral considerations, levying high financial costs for individuals who are already in dire financial states.
Aden witnessed disappearance of antibiotics in most of the pharmacies. Dozens of patients complained about the disappearance of some medicines from the shelves of most pharmacies, while they exist in the black market at high prices. They added it has become difficult to obtain medicines and the availability of them became scarce and in poor quality. Social Fund for Development in Hodeidah completed building the first infectious diseases center in Yemen. The organization also provided Rimah, Hajja, Dhamar, Mahwit with health services through several facilities, including fever and radiology labs, in addition to 6 intensive care units beds. Health sector in Yemen has been damaged hugely because of the ongoing conflict. Hospitals lack basic equipment and even medical staff to function. The following report has more details.
Yemen is currently experiencing outbreaks of poliovirus type 1 and type 2, as the Global Polio Eradication Initiative warns of polio outbreaks in areas under the Houthi militia control. GPEI issued a statement stating that the 2 poliovirus strains emerge in populations with low immunity, and both can result in lifelong paralysis and even death. The Eastern Mediterranean Ministerial Regional Committee on Polio Eradication issued a statement expressing deep concern around these expanding outbreaks and requesting all authorities in Yemen to facilitate the resumption of house-to-house vaccination campaigns in all areas. The GPEI has further urged the Houthi leaders to conduct high-quality house-to-house vaccination campaigns to stop the 2 concurrent outbreaks as soon as possible. Yemeni children face no shortage of threats, as they are confronting prolonged conflict, devastating healthcare system, hunger, malnutrition, and diseases. However, polio is one disease that can easily be prevented if the precautionary procedures are taken into consideration before the virus reaches the poor children. The vaccination response must achieve at least 90% of children vaccinated repeatedly with polio vaccine to protect them from polio and prevent seeding new vaccine-driven emergencies. Last month, the Yemeni Health Ministry completed a polio vaccination campaign that included more than 2 million children in 12 governorates under legitimacy control, with an 86% rate of the general target. The ministry hoped to exceed the 90% barrier by the first round and announced its willingness to implement a second round a month from now. However, the militia continues to prevent children from their little rights in life by getting vaccinated in areas under their control.
Here's a reminder of main headlines. The High-Level Donors Conference leaves vulnerable Yemenis behind and fails to increase funds for humanitarian response plan. The United Nations Special Envoy Hans Grunberg discusses with Yemeni experts priorities of the security track in the country. Torrential rains hit different parts in Hodeidah and caused severe damage to displaced people's camps in the city. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.